the first time it happens, you're inside the ball of yarn and it's surrounding you, and you're like, this darkness all around me, how do I get out? So in your struggle to get out, you're maybe creating a few more tangles in there. You're bunching things, you're cutting things away, so it's very chaotic when you're in the ball of yarn. So when you start to slowly untangle it again, and it's a great way, like you mentioned, memory is a very funny thing. With memory, I feel like there are times when our memory tries to backstab us by creating scenarios that didn't necessarily happen, right? We shape the memory in a way that makes it look bad for us, right? So when we actually write down what has happened with us, you know that this is something that didn't necessarily happen.
Erasure Class podcast by SundayPyjamas.
Well, Madhurima, I would say, I really appreciate you spending the time. And since the first time we talked, I have been trying to educate myself on the subject more and more. And the whole thing started with me trying to analyze, okay, have I experienced this in my life and career as well? And I would say I have. It's just that I did not have the understanding of it. I never seeked out or really reached out to anyone. I just kind of, dealt with it on my own. So I do meditation quite a lot, and it started at a very young age. And I would say whenever I feel like, I'm not able to make sense of things, and the one problem with me over and over again is that there was almost always information overload, um, and it was difficult to really understand the information and then make a decision. But I feel uh, a lot of people who are trying to go solo and build something of their own, I would say they can relate to it in a way or two. And it's really cool that you are doing something about it. So thank you for coming, and thank you for doing what you do, man.
Oh, thank you so much. I genuinely appreciate that. And I resonate so hard with that. That is actually one of the topics that I'm working towards on creating resources right now is information overload, because a lot of entrepreneurs, right? Like when you're starting out, at least now we have the trend of asking for help, for looking out for help, thanks to the age of the internet. Like people can literally search on Google, they don't even have to reach out to anyone. And so there's like so much information available, and a lot of times is the same information presented in different perspectives by different people. So it can get very chaotic really quickly. And a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people who are, like you mentioned, trying to start out doing something on their own. And one thing that I've noticed is as we are progressing, the age of people starting something on their own is kind of decreasing, right? Like people literally in the age of 10 to 12 years old are going out there and are like, I want to create this and I'm going to create it. And thankfully, the parents are supportive enough of their decision. But there's also this, information overload that happens like, oh, I'm great at this one thing, but I also have to run a business around it. So I have to learn about this business. And so it can get very chaotic. And information overload is something that genuinely stresses out so many people. It's not even funny. It's like, I want to do something great in my life, but here I am having to sit through multiple books, podcasts, videos, and all this stuff to figure out what I should be doing. So yeah, it can get very chaotic very quickly.
I wanted to understand how burnout happens. I would say the usual suspects is that the environment has a very big role to play in it, and then there are definitely some personal factors that come into play, like how you deal with them, how you respond to them, how you process them. So could you share how you got introduced to understanding this in your personal life? Were you experiencing this from a very young age, or did you experience this, for example, when you started working?
Yeah, that is a really good question, Prathamesh. So, a couple of things, right? I'll answer it as you asked me the questions. Number one, burnout is actually, and this is from my perspective and what I have seen and experienced as a coach who helps people with burnout and stress, is burnout is stress that has been affecting you for a really long time and hasn't been managed properly. So improper stress management for a really long time, right? A lot of people think that burnout is something that happens immediately, but it's genuinely stress that has been stacking up one over the other, one over the other. It's like, video games. If you play video games, there's like, you stack up all the damages and then you hit one big punch, right? And that one big punch, even though it's just a punch, it actually ends up killing you in the game. It's the very same thing with burnout. Is stress is just stacking up over time, over time, over time, and then suddenly you are burnt out. And burnout is not even bad. To be completely honest, it's our body's defense mechanism to shut down so that we can actually take care of ourselves, because it has been begging us, like, oh my gosh, you need to relax. Like, my body is begging me, Madhurima, you need to stop, you need to work on yourself, you need to take care of yourself. And I'm like, nah, I'm a work, because of all the hustle culture that I was introduced to, all the glorification of workaholic people that I was introduced to. I was like, nah, I have to work. Like, that's how I will be successful. And so my body's like, you know what, I'm shutting you down. And even then, all I do is I try to push myself to work more, which just prolongs the burnout experience. So burnout, I believe, is like our body's defense mechanism in ensuring that we can relax, we can calm down, and we can get our body to our natural state internally, right? In my own experience, now I can go on about burnout. Honestly, burnout and stress, I geek about it literally all the time. One of the reasons why my laptop was crashing before our meeting was I had like 20 research papers open and books open, and I was like going through, and I was like, oh my gosh, everything is crashing. But yeah, I can go on about burnout. But in my personal life, much like yourself, when I was introduced to burnout without having any awareness around burnout, and my one of the biggest experience with burnout happened at the end of 2019, when I was working in an ad agency and I was a solo copywriter. And so I was in the marketing field before I became a coach, right? And as a copywriter, I was managing 3 to 4, sometimes 5 to 6 clients, and working for my own company as well. So I was creating blogs, I was creating um, content, I was reaching out to people, I was doing community management, I was also directing the graphic designer, I was directly interacting with the clients to ensure that they have an understanding. So it was getting really chaotic, right? And for a long time I couldn't understand what was going on, because personally I was like, yo, I'm getting paid to write. This is like my childhood dream come true. And then very quickly that dream turned into a nightmare, because I remember I was getting so frustrated. There were times that I was awake late into the night and then had to get up early in the morning, because we had clients based out in US and we had clients based out in India. So it was getting very chaotic very quickly for me. And the workplace was also not that great in terms of the workplace, right? It was a very toxic workplace, and every time I wanted to speak up about it, just the fact that I was working from home back in 2019 was lauded over my head, that, oh, but you're working from home, why do you have to worry? And I was like, yeah, but this is not something that you can consider as like a winning point, right? Because this was something that we discussed on the day of the interview, that I'd be working from home because it's a really long commute and I was still traveling a lot of times to the office and back. So it was literally like 4 hours of commute, right? It was chaotic. I had to travel from here to the metro station, from the metro station to that place, reach out. Then I had to travel again. So it was very, very chaotic. And so I just didn't like the way the company was functioning, but I didn't know what was happening to me. I was constantly stressed out. I would kind of get a panic attack. And I feel like a lot of people in the content marketing field would relate to this, or even in the office culture would relate to this. Like every time my phone would give up a tone that, oh, I received a message or a mail, I'd be like, oh, again? I had to do this again? Like, what the hell? Right? I would cringe away from my laptop, I would cringe away from my phone. And I was just getting really anxious, depressed, and I was reaching a very, I don't want to say psychotic, but it was a very unnerving phase for me, because I didn't know what was happening with me, what was wrong with me. Thinking back upon it, I realized that it was almost 3 to 5 months when I was working for the company, when I hadn't written anything for myself. Right? Like, I love to write for myself. I love to express myself. based on nature and based on the things around me, right? I'd be like, the moonlight is softly drifting through the leaves, and it's like this and that, like the wind is hitting my face. I would love to express myself using nature, and I hadn't done that for 3 to 5 months because I was so irritated with the concept of writing. And so eventually I realized that I couldn't do this anymore. I realized that I didn't have the capacity to deal with this anymore. And when I decided to quit, my boss was like, "Well, I need a note from your therapist saying that you are actually depressed and you actually have panic attacks. Otherwise, I can't let you guys." Like, bro, I'm quitting. You can't force me to come. I'm not gonna do all of that. Like, that was such a huge red flag. I was like, so my own experience is not being considered here, my own thought process is not being considered here, it's not being valued unless I get it from a certified therapist that, hey, yeah, she's mentally sick, she needs help. Like, unless that was happening, I wouldn't have received. So I just decided not to go anymore, and then he let me go as well. I think I wasn't even paid for the last month or something, because that was one thing he was lording over my head as well. Like, if you quit now, I won't give you the salary for a month. I was like, okay, fine, don't give me, I don't need it, take it, keep it. And to be honest, it was a very whew, it was a very powerful decision for me and a very important decision for me, but a very scary decision as well, because it was at that point of time in my career. I had just graduated from college, I was the sole breadwinner of the house. So taking that decision was a really huge step, right? And I was as fighting myself because I was likely to receive a pay rise. I was likely to live in a better environment starting then, after having shared all the things that I'd already shared with him multiple times. So I was like, you know what, I'm quitting. But it was a very big decision for me personally. Uh, but even after that, and that was the biggest burnout experience that I had, but even after that, I didn't know what was happening, right? Like, I didn't know burnout was not such a big hyped up term back then as it is now, right? And so I had no idea what was going on until almost a year and a half later, when I was like, what I went through was burnout. So it literally took me 6 more months after that to work on myself to get out of burnout. And what didn't necessarily help was I was obviously stressed out because of my job, having quit that in a very financially terrible position that I was quitting it at. And then just into that, we had the pandemic starting, and I have health anxiety, which made me want to genuinely be like, I don't know what is happening to me, right? Because I was so freaked out. There was so much fear being showcased on the television, shared over social media, that I was like, I am going to die and I'm not even going to get to see my family while I'm dying. That is such a horrible thought process to have experienced after having witnessed my dad pass away in 2018. So it was all mixed up into this huge big chunk, and it literally took me 2.5 years to actually overcome my burnout. So when I had actually started coaching, that was towards the end of 2019, beginning of no towards the end of 2020, in the beginning of 2021, I was like, I want to be a coach. That is something that genuinely will help me, uh, help not only me but also help others, like that was when I realized that this is my purpose. Like, all the other things make sense, but this is my purpose. And one of my mentors had asked me, you are doing a really good job. He was like, great, you are helping people reconnect with themselves, because that was the theme of my coaching when I started out, is reconnecting with yourself, getting back in touch with yourself, finding yourself after you felt lost, because what that was what I felt during the pandemic. And I remember telling this to my mentor, and he was like, this is great, but what else? Because there's something missing here. And you know it too. I was like, ooh, that's a good question. That was my very first experience with good questions, as a coach. And we value good questions a lot. So I was like, that's a good question. And that was when I realized I could help people with burnout. Now, as I started studying about it, as I started learning and nerding about it, I realized that back in college when I was preparing for medicine, and you know this, right? Like in India, medicine and engineering competition is sky high. Like, you lose a single mark and you go back thousands and thousands of seats, and you're like, what is happening with me? And so I remember having faced student burnout during that point, because I was so stressed out. I was so stressed out about getting a seat. I had already taken a drop year to get a medical degree, and I was still not getting the degree. So I was like, I was just missing it off by a few marks. So it was very, very chaotic. And I just wanted to be like, what is happening to me? Because I had constant panic and anxiety attacks. Obviously, back then, I didn't know what was happening to me. Back then, I was like, okay, if this is not working, I need to choose a different stream of study because I can't spend one more year doing this. I didn't have it in me. Like, I remember, and I still have, like, my palms are still kind of sweating just thinking about it. And this is one of the experiences of burnout, is the effects of burnout are like long lasting. Like, you still experience the trauma connected to it. But I remember towards the end of my pre-medical testing scenario kind of a thing, I remember just sitting in those halls to write down the exam. I would have panic attacks. I couldn't sit. My palms would start sweating. I would start breathing heavily. I couldn't write the exam because it was so scary of a concept. And afterwards, I was like, I can't do another year of this. I genuinely can't. Like, to hell with my dreams. I genuinely can't do this right now, because if I try doing it all over again, I'm gonna go crazy. So, yeah, long story short, I did experience burnout a lot of times in my life. The one that happened in 2019 was the biggest burnout experience that actually helped me understand a bit more about how I had experienced burnout in the past, and was the, you know pushing factor to actually, or the catalytic factor that started my journey as a coach who helps people with stress and burnout.
Could you share more about your dad?
Ooh, that's a yeah, I mean,
Take
what
your
do you want to
time.
hear?
Anything you would like to tell me.
He was a great dude. He was a writer. He was just as multi passionate as I am. He was um, a writer, a poet. He used to be the life of the party. Literally, like, he used to spoil kids rotten in our building, because he used to call them over and he used to be like, you have exams going on, well, let's party. And I'd be like, no, dad, that's not what you're supposed to do. It's like, shut up and come party. I was like, no, 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 it's fine, I'm gonna go study and geek out. I was like a born nerd, right? But he was a really great person. He genuinely supported me so much in my life. Like, there were obviously moments where we had our fights, like every father and daughter has, but I was like, daddy's little girl kind of a thing. I loved him, and he was genuinely such a powerful force in my life. And he was the one who introduced me to spirituality in the first place. We used to have, chai pe charcha kind of a thing. We used to have spiritual chats in the family. We used to talk about literature, talk about films and music, and have discussions around it. He was a published author. He actually, I think it is in some university here in Hyderabad itself, where I can't remember, but his books are still considered as a teaching thing, for teaching material for the students in some of the universities here. So, and he was like, he was the early adapters of internet, as you will, because he started blogging, and he genuinely made his name and fame in that. He won a lot of awards for the things he used to write, and he used to write. Oh, his writing is so powerful. um I haven't read it, solely because we were the ones who would have conversations around how the story should be built, right? Like, we were his beta testers or beta readers, as you would say. So we would have conversations around, this is what you should be doing. You shouldn't be doing this kind of thing. Like, we would have conversations around how the plot would thicken, kind of a thing. But yeah, basically, we were the ones who would have conversations. He was an artist. Yeah, he was just genuinely a multi passionate person who loved living life fully. And he was a hard worker, he was a smart worker. He was really well known in the marketing field for his skills of getting sales and all of that stuff. He was a chaotic being. I mean, we still, there are times when me and my brother, we are like, oh, we wish we had an Oja board so that we could kind of get him here and tell us sales tips on how to kind of run our businesses. But yeah, I mean, he was really, really powerful, smart, and enigmatic, as people would say. There were so many layers to him, layers that I'm still uncovering. I'm gonna be honest, I'm still uncovering a lot of layers of his. Yeah, yeah.
How do you feel your life changed after, uh,
I mean,
and
it
how
definitely.
did you?
I mean, life obviously changed. I had to take up a lot of responsibilities after he passed away, and that was solely because he used to pamper me rotten. He would be like, "Oh, you don't have to worry. I'm here now. Why do you have to worry?" So I didn't learn a lot of things in the money and financial aspects, basically, because I was like, "He's there to take care of it. Like, why do I have to worry?" Um, we had to find strength again within ourselves. We had to redefine our family. There were a lot of pros and cons to it. I'm not gonna lie. Like, our relatives weren't necessarily the greatest in the world. So we eventually kind of walked away and broke off our family from our relatives because we didn't it was getting too chaotic for us. It was getting too much anxious, there was too much anxiety and stress around it. So we eventually kind of disbanded from our relatives. Yeah, I mean, there were pros and cons. We still miss him every single day. We still miss his light. But we also know that he's looking after us. We have that sense of, he's there to take care of us. Like, we can still depend on him without having to be like, oh, he's not here with us. But like knowing that he's here with us spiritually, I feel like that is something that is really important for us. There are still times when we have fights with him. We yell at him. We're like, "Oh my gosh, you this, blah, blah, blah." Lots of things goes on, and we are like, "You did this, you did this, you did this." But then there's also times when we are like, "Ah, you did this. Thank you so much for that."
How do you think, you took on that? Okay, it's my job now to figure it out. How do you think that switch happened inside of you,
I mean,
and how
we
long do
knew,
you
right?
feel it took you to understand it?
No, I mean, I feel like we were very understanding. So he had cancer, so and it was the last stage. And even though it came on very suddenly, like he was out of it, but he remitted very suddenly. Um, we knew that it might not be looking as good as we wanted it to look good at that point of time. Like, we were praying with all our hearts, but it wasn't working. And eventually, I think on the last day, I was the one who prayed to God, like, if you're not at least gonna remove his suffering, take him away peacefully, because that was too much. He was in a lot of pain. It's not even funny. Like, his cries could be heard throughout the ICU. He was in a lot of pain. So we didn't want to see him suffer like that. It didn't make sense to um keep pushing him when it wasn't right to do so. We didn't want to kind of torture him into being like, you have to stay with us. So we were aware we had to take on the responsibilities. We already had taken up a lot of responsibilities. So it's not like we didn't. Everyone was responsible for one aspect of things in their life. Uh, it didn't necessarily be a sudden change into, oh, this is what we have to do, kind of a thing. But yeah, I mean, towards the end, when he was going away, we were all there with him. Thankfully, we were all there surrounding him, and mom did tell him that, you don't have to worry about anything. We'll take care here. Just go be with Osho. And Osho was dad's favorite mentor and teacher, and he had actually met him, which is really interesting. Um, so yeah, we did have an understanding of the responsibilities we had to take on, and we didn't necessarily shy away from it. And it wasn't necessarily that I was the only one who had to evolve. I knew at that point of time that I had to finish my education because it was my last semester in college. I had to finish my education, and I had to take on the role of taking care of the family. And just like that, my mom had to take care of the finances at home, take care of the family, um you know hold us and support us while we were out there doing our own things. My brother was getting his 12th standard degree. um yeah, he was studying for his 12th board, so it was, we all had our responsibilities and we all took them on pretty fast. We were aware of what we had to do in that journey. So yeah.
Well, I think you did a pretty good job at it, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, he wouldn't necessarily be like, he would have wanted me to go and get a business degree, but I'm glad that I'm able to, like, at the end of the day, he always told us that he wanted us to be good citizens of the country. He wanted us to be people who supported other people, and I feel like I am fulfilling that, at least that part of my role, with helping people manage their stress and burnout. So yeah.
How do you feel compared to those chaotic times? Uh, like your life has evolved. Like, what do you feel is the difference now? Like, it was 2018. In the middle of it, there was chaos and a lot of work from you and your family. And now here you are. And this surely feels different.
Yeah, it definitely feels different. I feel like, who I okay, so I'm gonna say it like this. I am someone who's an extremely multi-passionate person and I love chaos. And so there are good aspects of chaos and bad aspects of chaos. I feel like during that phase there was a lot more of bad chaos than there was good chaos. Chaos that I had created for myself, right? Back then it was chaos created by the circumstances around me and I didn't have any control over them. Right now, however, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, being an entrepreneur is not an easy journey. There are times when you have to cry yourself to sleep because you're wondering about what life is going to look like and when are things going to work out. And there are times when the bad chaos is overwhelming and takes over you. But thankfully, I'm in a space where the good chaos actually overpowers the bad chaos. As in, there's so much good chaos that I'm creating, there is so much amazingness that I'm working towards and creating, that bad chaos doesn't necessarily affect me as much as it used to before. Thankfully, I mean, a lot of that credit goes to the work that I do, and not letting stress kind of affect me. But yeah.
And how do you think, it happened? Like, did you made like architectural changes to your life when it comes to, let's say, having a discipline every day, eating properly, sleeping properly, working with only a certain kinds of people, doing only a certain kind of work?
I feel like, okay, so I'm definitely not as disciplined as people like me to believe. I am once again a pure being of chaos. So there is a lot of times where discipline doesn't exist. But I feel like reaching this point is like a lifelong journey. It took me 2 years to reach this point. I genuinely made a post yesterday on Instagram where I was talking about how in the beginning of your journey you genuinely say yes to literally anyone who comes up to you. Like, they need help, you're like, yes, let's do it, right? But then you realize that, oh, this is not an energetic match. I have to figure out the boundaries that I have to create for myself, and matching with someone energetically is really huge, right? Otherwise, I explained this yesterday, right? It was, if we are matching energetically, it's my fire and your fire coming together to create a bigger fire. If you're not matching energetically, I will have to give away a bit of my fire to you so that we match, or you will have to put off a bit of my fire so that we match. And the resulting fire is not as big as we want it to be. It's not the way that we want to see the end result happening. So I feel like matching some with someone energetically is really important. Creating those boundaries around life, understanding the importance, understanding the mindset behind the work that you're doing is really important. Uh, it's it's stacking up. I'll say that, as damage genuinely stacks up, so does goodwill. There are a lot of times when you will stumble, you will let go, and you'll be like, I don't want to do this anymore. But then, that this is something that I like to say a lot, right? If you have the awareness, you can't ignore the awareness, right? If you weren't aware of something, that's a whole different story. But if you are aware of something that needs to be taken care of and you're ignoring it, it's still there in the back of your mind nagging you, like, you do remember I'm here, right? You do remember that I exist, right? So no matter how many times you stumble, you have to take action. How that action is coming forward, how you are evolving that action, how you're changing that action so that it suits you the best and suits your awareness the best, is a completely different story. But awareness without action doesn't matter. Like, there's no use of being aware then. It's like, I'd rather be ignorant than be aware of my flaws or things that I need to work on. So it's that journey. The entire journey is stumbling back a few times, then walking forward 10, 15 steps, then maybe stumbling back a few more times, and then walking a few more steps ahead. So I feel like, it's not linear. That's what I always say, even with when you're working on healing yourself, when you're working on healing your trauma, when you are healing your inner child, having conversations, when you're working with stress, when you're working with burnout, no matter what you're doing, nothing is linear. I feel like a lot of people try to make it sound like, oh yeah, this is point A, this is point B, let's reach here. It's a straight line. You're going to reach here the quickest. But it's not like that. A lot of people then make it like, oh yeah, it's an upward slope or a downward slope. But like, no, it's not. It's a topsy turvy. It's like a curvy line drawn by a 5-year-old kid who had a really amazing chance of getting a piece of crayon in their hand. Right? It's like that. It's like them drawing and squiggling lines to reach from point A to point B. So I feel like it's just that journey of going back a few steps, moving forward 10, going back a few steps, maybe taking a loop, reaching back to where you were, then coming, starting that journey again. It's like that. I believe personally.
When you are when you described good chaos and bad chaos, I would say it makes sense to me. I do understand what you're saying. But let's say when you say you are in it, right, you are definitely trying to, if let's say there is a lot of bad chaos around you, you definitely try to imagine a state where that is, I would say, terminated, eliminated. So do you think like that? Okay, this is the state I would want to be in, not just mentally, but like overall. Okay, right now things are bad, but okay, this is the kind of state I would like to go to. And if I want to go there, okay, these are the kinds of activities and things I need to do in this amount of time. Do you have that kind of vision in your head when you are dealing with something like this?
Definitely. I feel like it's really important to have that vision. I was a really big overthinker, right? I was world's most stressed out kid, if you will, from a really young age, because of how ambitious I was in life, how ambitious I was around my dreams and the things that I wanted to achieve. So a lot of times that bad chaos exists and it swallows you whole, right? For me personally, what I have found is every time that bad chaos exists for a really long time, I was like, no, I don't see you, you're bad, go away from me. I had those childish whims of pushing it away, when in reality it exists and you can see it. Again, it's awareness that you can't really ignore. Something is troubling you and you're trying to push it away, and the more you push it away, the more strength it gathers, the more negativity feeds into it, and the more bigger it becomes. So for me personally, the way that I have resolved bad chaos and turned it into a good chaos is actually sitting down patiently with peace, and imagine like a ball of yarn completely knotted up, right? You have to sit down and untangle it one by one, one by one, one by one, before it's like a completely straight ball that you can then twirl into a proper ball of yarn. So for me, what that looks like is actually sitting down and looking into what is happening, looking into this ball of yarn. I'm like, what is happening? Where is that knot? What is the thing that created all of this chaos around it? Figuring out, taking one step at a time, working with all the surface level knots, untangling it slowly before reaching the main knot, and being like, this is where the problem lies. Having a conversation, seeing why it originated, understanding the ball of yarn as it was a human being. I'm like, yeah, I see where you're coming from. I see why this could have troubled you. I see where this is affecting you badly, affecting us badly. And then being like, well, what can I do about this? And having a conversation, coaching myself through that, and being like, oh, okay, this is an issue that we are seeing. How do we go about resolving this? What are the steps that we can take to resolve this? Then one step at a time, you move ahead, you move forward, and you slowly untangle it. And then you thank the ball of yarn for being like, hey, thank you for showing up. If you didn't show up, I wouldn't have known that this problem existed within me, you know. I wouldn't have known that there was something troubling me so much subconsciously. I thank myself for being an aware enough person to recognize that this thing is existing, right? Instead of it being like an invisible ball of yarn that was troubling me, I now see it for what it is. Having a conversation with it and being like, hey, thank you so much for showing up. And thank myself for seeing the ball of yarn. And then I move a step forward. I'm like, thank you. And I would like to let you go with peace now. I like to let you go with peace, and I'm not going to forget about you. That is not my intention. I'm not throwing you away and being like, ha, well, I've dealt with it. But more along the lines of, I see you and let's work together on ensuring that you don't get entangled ever again. Right? What are the steps that we can take so that you don't get tangled up ever again? There are going to be times where it tangles up all over again, and you're like, I dealt with this issue. Why is it coming up again? But then that is once again a clue as to, oh, there must be something deeper. There must be a deeper knot in there that I didn't necessarily see. So I feel like that is the way I go about working around my chaos.
You know what I have experienced? Let's carry your yarn example forward. Is that when you are taking one thread out at a time, you kind of understand that, oh, your brain is producing an emotional response to it,
Mm-hmm.
and the emotional response is creating the chaos. And what I would say experienced or learned over time is that if you look at individual strings over and over again, the intensity of emotional response subsides. It starts going away because you kind of understand that, oh, there is no need to feel all of this anymore. And from a very powerful event on experience, it just boils down to any other event that does not generate the response anymore inside of you. And then, so I'm at a stage where most of the events that I experience in the last 25, 26, or 26 years of my life, yeah, they are just like any other dinner or lunch I had with a friend of mine
Hmm.
now.
Yeah,
Does it make sense?
it
And
makes
the
sense.
way I got here is by writing the whole thing down with as much detail as I can, because memory is a funny thing, and just reading it for the last, I would say, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. No, that
And
is
every time
such
I
a
read
powerful
it,
thing.
it,
Yeah.
it yeah, every time I read it, yes, in the early days, it would generate like a very strong emotional response to the point where I would slightly freak out. And and then with time, right, the it's the same content, I'm reading the same things, but the response inside of me is kind of subsiding, it's going away.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? I genuinely like what you mentioned because it's like the first time it happens, you're inside the ball of yarn and it's surrounding you. And you're like, this darkness all around me. How do I get out? So in your struggle to get out, you're maybe creating a few more tangles in there. You're bunching things, you're cutting things away. So it's very chaotic when you're in the ball of yarn. After the moment passes, you're outside of the ball of yarn and the ball of yarn still exists. So when you start to slowly untangle it, again, like you mentioned, it's a really good thing that you actually wrote it down, because writing is a great way to get all of the things outside. And it's a great way, like you mentioned, memory is a very funny thing. With memory, I feel like there are times when our memory tries to backstab us by creating scenarios that didn't necessarily happen, right? We shape the memory in a way that makes it look bad for us, right? So when we actually write down what has happened with us, you know that, this is something that didn't necessarily happen. This is something that just came out of the blue, right? So writing is a great way to work around it, and then once you slowly start to untangle it, it doesn't affect you anymore. It's a funny topic for sure. I feel like, what I was mentioning with you, I think you I sent you the book Emotional Agility by Susan David. It mentions the power of writing things down, you know, um, because it mentioned how a lot of people, which I feel like is really powerful with what is happening with the layoffs across the IT industry, is what she did. They did an experiment. There were three control groups, and three or two control groups. And basically, people were told to write about their experience of having been laid off after working in a company for literally 40, 50 years. So basically their entire life, right? Like that was the thing with the Gen Zs, that they worked throughout their life in one particular company. And I am honestly uh, very respectful of that, because it takes a lot of guts to stay in a company both during the good times and the bad times. Um, and it mentioned how when they wrote about their experience being laid off, them and the people who were in the control group who didn't necessarily write down about their experience, when they both started looking for jobs, the people who wrote about their experience actually got jobs, right? They got jobs more quickly, and they were in a much more healthier state. So I feel like there's a lot of power behind writing things down. It is my number one tip. I often tell people that, hey, especially when you are starting something new, record your journey, and you can either document it in a book, in your diary. You can document it in the notes app that's literally available on phones, and there are like multiple notes app available. Or you can simply just go out there and record it on video, like, hey, this is me, this is what I'm working on, this is what I'm experiencing. So I feel like there's a lot of power behind recording and documenting your journey, which is something that I honestly tell people, entrepreneurs, all the time. Like, you need to record your journey. A lot of times when you are in the when you're feeling stressed out about how much you haven't done, you can look back at your recordings, you can look back at your journals and see how much you have actually done. What did you do to reach the space you are in, the place, the mind space you are in, to actually think about, oh, I haven't done all of these things. Well, what did you do to reach here? Let's let's hit pause and give gratitude to that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. How do you think, you learned about these practices?
That's a really good question. So personally for me, I have to say this, and I'm not trying to brag here on anything, but a lot of the practices that I come up with, both in my personal life and as well as in my coaching journey, a lot of these practices are instinctual, as in their gut feelings about, oh, if you're experiencing this, how about we give this a try? How about we give this a try? How about we try breathing for a minute here? How about we try to look into our pulse and check our pulse and see how we are feeling about something? So a lot of the work that I have done, and a lot of the practices that I've created around my coaching services and in my personal life, they're very instinctual in nature. When I learned more about coaching, when I learned more about the techniques available out there, that's when I realized that there's a label for this. This is actually out there already. But thankfully, I genuinely am in a very grateful place where I can believe and trust my gut and allow it to do whatever it needs to do. A lot of times, and this is something that I say a lot before coaching calls, is I actually close my eyes, because it can get very overwhelming, being in a coaching container, having to guide someone, lead someone to their own kind of epiphanies. It can get very overwhelming as a coach to be in that space and hold a safe space so that they can go ahead and share their journey. So this is something that I do a lot, and this was actually shared to me and a lot of other people inside a coaching container by my coach Preston Smiles. And he said that a lot of times when he's starting coaching, he actually closes his eyes and he tells the universe, source, God, Allah, Krishna, whoever you believe in, he's like, move through me. This person needs guidance. I need you to move through me. So there are a lot of times, and I have seen this happen not only with me, but a lot of other coaches as well, that a lot of times they share things that they didn't necessarily have an awareness around before that moment passed through, right? And my very first experience was long before, like with my very first coaching client. I remember we were talking about how she didn't feel like she was receiving enough. And I shared this with her, and this was very specific to her as an individual. I was like, you are in a space where you are constantly giving things away from your cup, right? You're emptying your cup to give to other people, and you feel like you're not receiving. But if you weren't receiving, how do you have material in your cup to give away to other people? More so than not receiving, you are actually creating a block. You're not seeing what you're receiving. You're not being conscious of the things that you're actually receiving, maybe from the universe, maybe from the things around you, maybe from friends and family. But it's time to actually open your eyes and see where you're receiving things from for you to actually give, right? And I'm not saying that this is something that is very generalistic to people all around the world, but in that moment I didn't know to say that. I was like, I had a gut feeling, so I just said it. And then she was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. So a lot of times, um thankfully, these practices come to me because of my gut feelings, because maybe of my connection to the universe, maybe because of things that need to be said in a particular moment comes forth, and I'm just in observance of that moment. Whenever something like that happens, spiritually I feel myself detaching and just looking at myself speaking, because I know that it's not me, right? And I'm not saying that I'm possessed, quote unquote possessed, or anything along those lines, but I am aware that this is a message that is something that the person in front of me needs to hear. And it's not necessarily coming from me as an individual, because I had no awareness around this. I had no awareness around what needed to be said at that point of time. So yeah, I mean, it's a very powerful, I feel like, for me personally, a visualization. And I know a lot of people are like, oh my god, she's woo woo. Hell yeah, I'm a woo woo. I'm the wooest girl in the world. But yeah, I mean, it's really powerful to be in witness of moments like that. And I'm genuinely grateful that in my journey as a coach, I got to experience a lot of those moments literally every day, every time I coach.
You know, a doctor exists in the world because there are a lot of diseases and ailments, right? And when it's a physical ailment for the body, it makes sense. The environment is not very friendly, and if it gets cold, we can catch a cold. But when we talk about, let's say, uh, psychological issues or mental issues, they are not necessarily natural. They are a lot of times, yes, there are biological factors to it, but a lot of, I would say, mental issues, trauma, let's say, let's call it, are caused by society, by our interactions with the society, by the culture. I'm not trying to take a dig at the culture and society by saying it's not important at all, but there is definitely something wrong, something that we are kind of missing out on, which can, which definitely, to fix it, it will be a long journey to fix all those small things. But like, your job exists because there is something wrong happening at a very large scale, like the experience you had in your at your job, at your first or second job. Yeah, something is wrong about that culture overall. S- right. And the root cause, I mean, yes, you can read books and write about things and take care of yourself at an individual level, but if we really want to, for example, help billions of people, we have to look deep down and try to think, what are we missing out on, what are we doing wrong, what do you think those things are, what which we are getting wrong at a very deeper level, and that's impacting like large masses of people, and which are very fixable if we can try to. What do you think those things are?
So here's the thing, right? Like, I love your question, and here's my perspective around it. For a lot of for a long period of time before I started this journey as a coach, I was someone who would blame the world for the way it was, right? And I'm not trying to fault that. right? That was my thought process back then. Right now, I know that controlling the world in its entirety is not something that I can do, right? Like, I'm not a dictator who can be like, do this, do this, do this, and this is how you live a healthy life. That is not my intention, and that is not my purpose as well. Because I'm aware of the fact that a lot of things are beyond my control. It's not mine to control, right? In a given moment, I can only control how I respond to a particular thing, right? That's where you, in between something that is triggering me and in between my reaction, I'm creating a space where I am thinking about it logically, going from my sympathetic nervous system, which is my survival instincts of fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or faint. I'm switching over from that to my parasympathetic nervous system, which is a lot more cognitive, which is a lot more logical. And I'm thinking about, well, how can I approach this? How can I approach this particular situation? What can I do as a person to change this particular situation? Right? And what is the role that I am playing in this? Right? So, a lot of times I feel like, even with what you mentioned, let's say, for what it is, let's say toxic work culture, let's pick that up as an example. I believe that a lot of time this work culture exists because this was the capital T truth for the people who are much more elder to us. This was how life existed for them. Back then, receiving orders and following them completely is what their truth was. And that is how they function, right? That is their truth. For me, it's my small t truth. It is truth that I believe exists, but it's not my capital T truth. I know that I'm not supposed to behave in that pattern because I am not in the surroundings and the environment, mind space, and all of that that those people were in. That may be their truth, but it's not my truth. So, in scenarios like that, I can either walk away, which is something that a lot of people do, they walk away. I can either change how I respond to this person, or we can have a conversation about it, right? I can either react, walk away, or have a conversation. And I can be like, hey, see, the things that you're mentioning here, I don't necessarily resonate with that. Let's have a conversation. For example, one example of a toxic work culture is people being asked to do overtime, right? Well, literally, I don't know if you saw that one video. It was such a popular video. I don't remember the name of the actor, but it was a short video about how um, this one dude was leaving his office at 6 p.m. and everyone was working. And so his friend is like, oh, so you're leaving already? He's like, yeah, well, I am leaving already. I have a life beyond this. I'm not someone who's supposed to stick around and work for hours. That is not necessarily my thing because I already finished my work. I don't have to do that. The person who was sitting down and who was passing a comment, that may be his truth, but this person's truth is not that. This person is aware that, oh, this is not right. I have a life beyond work. I am not going to sell my soul to this company only to be kicked off any point of time at any point of time, right? Maybe this person's truth is completely different. So I feel like at any given moment you can either walk away, you can respond, you can be like, hey, yeah, this that, you can react and respond to it, or you can have a conversation and try to come to a compromise where both of you understand each other's capital T truth and find a space where you can come together and have a conversation. A lot of toxic work culture comes from and understanding the old mindset and the new mindset and reaching a midway point, right? um it comes from the old mindset. The toxic work culture comes from the old mindset. The new mindset is, this is not right. Then you have to come to a midway point so that you can start transitioning forward, because very quickly our generation's mindset is not going to be the mindset that works for the next generation's mindset. That's the truth, right? Like, even for me as a millennial, I have the fear of, oh, if I quit this company, I don't know if I will get another job really quickly. For the next generation, it's like, oh, well, you know what? We don't care. we're gonna get it anyways. It's not ours to worry about. So I feel like there is that aspect of it, right? Like you have to understand where the old mindset exists, the new mindset exists, try to reach a midway point so that you can start moving forward. I believe this is something that happens even internally, right? Like every time we have limiting beliefs, there is a point where you're aware of the limiting beliefs having existed for such a long time, and that being a capital T truth. So once we are aware of that, we start to bash ourselves up. We're like, oh my gosh, you're so disgusting, you're so stupid, why did you believe all this stuff? But that belief existed for a reason. It existed because there was a necessity for it to exist, right? It helped me survive to the point where I am now thinking consciously about what needs to change in my life, what needs to evolve, what is no longer serving me. And it's a new mindset that is serving me. So I need to understand this and let it go with love. So I feel like a lot of times we have conversations along these lines. There is a lot of, there is one ingredient missing, I would say, and that is compassion. Compassion for the old mindset, compassion for the new mindset, and reaching a midway point, right? I feel like that is something that I am trying to inculcate in my own life, because for a long time I used to be like, oh, the outside world is blah 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 blah. I'm like, yeah, well, great, okay, that exists. You can't control that. What can you control? So I feel like that is my perspective around it.
Yeah, in the sense, like when you say burnout, right? A lot of my friends are also experiencing it. All the people who are working in, let's say, cities like Bangalore and Bombay.
Please ask him to reach out to me.
Yeah. So there has to be something that is fundamentally wrong in the system, you know like when almost everyone is feeling it, then why are there no actions towards mitigating it, towards solving that problem? So if these companies are not taking care of the most important asset, that is the employee, then what are they optimizing for? Because if they go like this, there will be nothing left to optimize for,
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. I feel like, see, once again, it's like, how compassionate are you about the new mindset and the new culture that people are following, right? People are still stuck in their old mindset and old culture, and they're not showing any compassion to the new mindset and new culture. So for companies that are working around this, there are L&D teams, there are teams that are working on creating systems to ensure that this doesn't happen, right? Employee turnover is one of the biggest problems within a company, because not only do you have to kind of let go of people who don't want to work anymore, and um, all of that process, you also have to spend money in hiring someone new, training them, getting them to a point only to realize that they want to leave as well. So, in a system that is corrupt or that is genuinely fading, is because they are still stuck to the old mindset. They have no compassion for the new mindset. There is no compassion towards the people. For a really long time, there was this belief of, let's not humanize and personalize people. Let's consider them as pieces of pawn on a chessboard with no
units
individuality.
basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, you're genuinely moving these pieces along so that the king is safe, the rest doesn't matter. Let us sacrifice the queen, let us sacrifice the rook, sacrifice the pawns and all of this stuff. If a pawn reaches till the end, he can become a queen, a king, whatever, whatever, he can do a lot of things in there, right? If a pawn reaches to the end other side of the board. So a lot of times pawns were sacrificed. People were considered as pawns, as all these side characters on a chessboard. And that mindset needs to change for sure. But that mindset can't change unless the people who are at the top of the company, they are aware that there is a need for this evolution to happen. There is a need for us to be compassionate about the new generation, right? That is not going to happen unless that awareness kicks in for them and they're ready to act on it. Once again, awareness kicking. A lot of times when people have awareness like this, all they do is put up boards with the company's mission statement, vision statement. They promise on the social media page that we are going to treat our employees with respect and love and all of this stuff. A lot of times, this is one of the solutions that I've seen people give is give a large vacation period, right? I'm a create a vacation period for almost the top employee gets to go on a vacation for a week. Well, great. But if they're coming back to a scenario where they are facing burnout, it's not going to change anything. They're going to get burnt out really quickly, really fast, no matter how long the vacation period was. So there needs to be, okay, so let me add on to the point. There needs to be compassion for the new mindset, then, and there needs to be an understanding of what that mindset actually is all about. What is the need for the evolution and why do we need to evolve, right?
Do you feel as we become more digital and more remote, like it will do the reverse?
Could you rephrase that question?
Yeah, in the sense, if you become more digital, right, then you are not in the space of the person. So, I mean, yes, we can interact with each other online, but you cannot really express to the extent which you can when you are, in the same space as each other. So, do you feel like this digital transformation revolution that you're experiencing, right, will make it even more difficult to be more compassionate?
I don't necessarily think so. And there's a reason behind that. I am one of the biggest introverted kids on the planet, right? Like, I didn't go out anywhere. But I had a lot of internet friends that I connected over fan fictions, over being a part of fandom, of being a part of Tumblr back when it came out in 2012. I think that was when it came out. I still believe that one of my most deepest connections and biggest connections are people that I've connected to on the internet literally miles away, right? Miles and kilometers away in different countries altogether. I feel like it all boils down to intention. Are you going to have that intention to be compassionate to others or not? It doesn't matter if you are in the same space literally 5 blocks away, and it doesn't matter if your countries apart. If you choose to be intentional, if you choose to have compassion for the people around the world, you can do that. If not, nothing's gonna change. It's gonna be it's gonna be what it is. It's A lot of people thankfully are working towards being more authentic online. So I feel like there is that aspect to it as well. If I am authentic and you're authentic, we can connect and I can be compassionate, right? And one of the biggest things that I've seen is people are very aware on this journey. Literally everyone is aware, right? When I am coaching someone, I know for a fact that I shouldn't be coaching someone in a space where I am not in the space to hold that safe space for them, where I'm almost trying to be this my normal self when internally I'm crumbling away, right? I can't do that because I know that the person in front of me will feel that shift, will feel that energetic shift, will be aware that Ash is not in it completely, right? You can get that. We all, especially people working on, hosting interviews, doing podcasts, we are very aware of the person's energy levels and how we are aligning with it. So if you're not being authentic, I will know that you're not being authentic and I won't connect, and that might decrease my compassion a bit. And in those moments I might need to give you a bit more compassion and be more understanding that he's not being authentic doesn't mean that there's a fault with me personally, doesn't mean there's a fault with him personally. There must be some pieces of information that I'm missing here, and that's completely fine. He is not required to share that information with me if he doesn't feel comfortable about it, right? You need to be understanding of the person, you need to be intentional about being compassionate, right? And you don't have to do that all the time. If you feel like you don't have the energy to be compassionate, don't connect with the person in front of you. That's completely fine. There are not going to be any hard feelings, right? I feel like when I started podcasting a really long time, I had a lot of trouble saying no to the person in front of me, before realizing that if I don't reject this person who is having this conversation with me right now in a podcasting space and might possibly come on my podcast, I will be completely drained holding space for them because our energy levels don't match. Going back, circling back to what we were talking about before, I'll either have to give away a bit of my fire or that person will have to put off a bit of my fire so that we connect and align and we can create a episode that resonates with my audience. So, thinking about all of those scenarios is just an understanding of the boundaries that you're creating, right? If you feel like you can't hold space for someone, don't do it because you're eventually going to hurt them. And when that happens, it sucks a lot. So it's better to be very open minded, it's better to be compassionate, and it's better to be aware that, hey, me trying to hold space for this person is going to eat away at my own peace, right? I'll be sacrificing a bit of me to hold space for this person when I'm not at that capacity yet. And it's better to let this person go for now, and maybe in the future I might be at a space where I can hold space for them. I don't need to add that much pressure around it. I don't know
Mhm.
if I answered your
Do you
question.
think? Yeah, yeah, I'm thinking about it, and I'm so thinking. Did you learn this on your own, or did you learn this from maybe your mom and your dad, or did you learn it by just doing it over and over again?
Yeah, I feel like, again, it's a mix of all of the things, right? Like, whew, I feel like I had to experience this to understand it, right? I had to experience all of these aspects. And there are times when our parents are like, don't do this, do this, don't do this, do this. And you're like, ah, well, what do they know, right? There are times when they know, and there are times when they don't. At the end of the day, it all boils down to how are you choosing to respond to something. What is the responsibility that you're taking upon yourself to actually act on the clues that are being presented in front of you? I feel like that is something that has happened a lot in my coaching journeys. I started to become responsible for my own life, right? I understood that a lot of times I'm going to receive unsolicited opinions and thought processes. I understood that that is sometimes going to happen from family and friends as well. It depends on whether I personally choose to go forward with it or not. But whatever decision I'll take, the consequences of those decisions is my responsibility, not anyone else's. People can tell you literally anything around the world, right? Like I can tell you, Prathamesh, you know what? Buy a gun, go kill 10 people. Are you gonna do that or not? That's on you. I might have suggested it. I can suggest the randomest thing. I can be like, jump off a cliff. I can be like, you know what? You can become a president. Let's go do that. We can, you can hear a lot of suggestions. How you are choosing to move forward with those suggestions is a different story. And that's your responsibility in its entirety, not anyone else's, no matter who suggests it to you, no matter what they suggest. And this is something that I learned from Gary Vee as well, is like, you need to understand that you need to stop blocking out both the good comments and the bad comments, right? Because there are going to be people who cheer you on without understanding your necessities, without understanding the roles that you have to play, and blatantly forcing opinions and thought process. And there are going to be people who do that exact same thing in a negative role. It's your decision how you move forward with it, and it's your responsibility at the end of the day.
No, that makes sense to me. Do you have any questions for me you'd like to ask me? Know anything?
Who what has been your experience in holding space for the people that come up on your podcast?
I find it very easy. I find it very. So even before I did the podcast, right? I would say since I was in college, even before that, it was very natural that I had so many instances where I would just be in a train or a bus and or on the street, or I would be in an event or a wedding, and I would just start talking to, let's say, a relative, a friend, right? And then 3 to 4 hours will go by, 5 hours will go by, and there will be this, I won't call it intense, but it was this very playful conversation, right? Where there was space for both of us to discuss anything and everything. And I don't know, why it keeps on happening to me over and over again. But like I don't even have to think about it as, oh, I'm holding space for them. I like, it's not an activity. It's just that when I start talking, and the whole, like, it just happens, and we start talking, and then one thing leads to the other, and then the next thing you know, you know the last 50, 70, 80, 20 years of this person's life.
That's a
And towards the
powerful.
end of it, it's just it just changes me as well, you know. So think about it this way. We started the podcast in 2020. So far, me, I have done around 40, 35, 40 episodes.
Nice. I love that for you. Yeah, I mean, it's a
Does it
powerful.
make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. I'm not gonna lie. It makes a lot of sense. It's like a lot of coaches also, right? That experience exists that a lot of people come to them for advice. A lot of them are very open to being in a space where they're hearing things from people. So, yeah, I'm glad that you chose this profession. I'm glad that you are creating this podcast and helping voices of people like us reach all around the world. That is a powerful, powerful thing to be doing.
But you tell me, you have been talking to me for, I don't know, for a while now. How was it for you on the other end?
It has been good. My camera just shut off, showing how long we have been having this conversation. So if you're fine, I mean, personally for me, it has been a wonderful journey. I am super excited to stay connected with you and to keep doing this work. Yeah, I mean, I am genuinely excited for you to be out there and doing the work that you want to do and receiving all the support that you need to receive around it.
Yeah. And how did you feel about the conversation?
It was
How
really
was it,
powerful.
answering all the
Yeah, I
questions?
mean, it was really powerful for me.